Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how to take a real life photo and composite a 3D car on top seamlessly. So when starting something like this, the first things you'll need to get is a backplate and also a HDRI. HDRI stands for High Dynamic Range Image and is essentially a 360 sphere of lighting and reflective information from that backplate's location. This contains multiple steps of exposure that will help light your 3D car and help embed it in the photo you're putting it in. Now I'm going to be using this backplate and this HDRI from Magground. Magground is a paid subscription service, so you get a certain amount of credits a month that you can buy on images and HDRIs, but there are free alternatives out there as well, such as polyhaven.com, which also do backplates, and if you find one that you like, you can go up here to the top right and find backplates that you might want to use. The main difference between Magground and Polyhaven is that Magground is normally high resolution backplates that you can use, but a lot of the times it doesn't contain color charts that help you match colors within your photo. Now for this example, I'm not going to use any color charts because most people won't have them anyway, but it is something that does help you if you want to get better at it. So the first thing that we need to do once we've got our backplate and HDRI ready is get something that will allow us to match the perspective of that photo in our 3D scene. So for this we're going to use F-Spy, which is a software which you can download, and essentially it will help you draw lines and then match the perspective. From there you export it out and then Blender can read that as a 3D camera. Now I'm going to put download links in the description, but you'll need to download F-Spy, which is the software, but then you'll also need to download the F-Spy Blender add-on, which will help Blender read the software. So once you've got F-Spy downloaded, you'll open it and this is what you'll see. And from there you're going to go File, Open Image, find the image that you're going to be using, such as this one. And from here you'll see we've got a few lines and we've got sort of this axis that we're going to need to place. So to start off with, I'm just going to match these y-axis lines to these paint grids, and I'm going to match our x ones to this one. It also helps if you want to undim the image, which you can do over here on the left so you can see a little bit better, and then you can carry on. So again, just matching the lines that these buildings follow, and again with this paint. Now this paint might not be completely straight, but it doesn't really matter in the long run. So once you've got that done, you're going to need to match this axis to a floor plane. And you can't really see it now, but if you go over here to 3D guide, you can go XY grid, and then you can see we've now got a grid. From here, you're going to want to place it sort of so that it matches this road. And this will be a little bit trial and error. You will be able to change it in 3D, so I wouldn't really worry about getting it perfect. But this is looking pretty good for me. So from there, you're going to want to save it, and then save it like F-Spy camera, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so now we're in Blender. We need to import our F-Spy camera. So if you haven't already installed the add-on, you need to go to Edit, Preferences, Install, and then install the zip file that came with the software. I've already imported it, so it should work for me. So now we can import our F-Spy camera. So import F-Spy. So now I've got my F-Spy camera in the software. I can view the camera and we can see our backplate is the background image of our camera. Now something that I like to do is click my camera and go into the camera data and then just turn that opacity up just so we can see a little bit more of what's happening. So from here we need to import our object that we're going to be using for our backplate. And I'm going to be using a Porsche model from HKV Studios, which I'll put the link where you can buy the model in the description. So now I've got my model in the software and it was slightly off the point of centered. So the model came in sort of around here, but you can see it doesn't really look as if it should be there, which is why I was saying when you're making the plane in F-Spy, it doesn't really matter because you'll probably just tweak it to your preference anyway. So I've moved it a little bit closer and a little bit up, but I think the general premise is that as long as it fits in a car lane, you'll probably be okay. So I'm pretty happy with this part, and if I go into rendered view, you can see all my materials and everything are already applied because I did that when I made the model. So now we need to import our HDRI that we're going to use to light the scene. So I'm going to go Shader Editor, Shift A, Environment Texture, and then open the one that I'm going to be using. And I'm just going to put that into the background and then just brighten it ever so slightly. And already we can see it's looking like it's going to fit into the scene a lot better. Now, one thing to note is that in our backplate, these windows are to the right side, and our lighting right now is not like that. So we're going to need to rotate it. But as well as that, you can also see that our car is placed on the curb, even though our car is actually over there. And this is what I was talking about, the background HDRIs. I do think they do a HDRI and then just do loads of backplates because that's how you make money. But if you're going to do a HDRI yourself, I would have tried to get one that is on the road so that it's reflecting it a little bit better. If you see over here, it's going to be reflecting stuff that isn't there. So that's just something we're going to have to deal with, unfortunately. So anyway, I'm going to rotate this by pressing Ctrl T, and that's going to use the Node Wrangler add-on, which is built into Blender. You just need to enable it if it's not working for you. And I'm going to rotate this just so them windows are on the right side of that car, and that should be good. So I'm pretty happy with that, but obviously we're missing a shadow. So I'm going to add in a plane by Shift A, and then I'm just going to scale that up. And then we can see it's not matching our wheels, so I'm going to bring that up as well. And I'm going to make it so it's flattening off this wheel just a little bit, as if like the car's driving and it's got some weight to the wheel. And then from there, I'm going to make it so it's the same color as this pavement. So I'm going to just sample the color from that pavement, just tweak it ever so slightly. Maybe desat it a little bit. And now we can see we've got a shadow, but we need to find a way to separate this shadow just so we're only getting the shadow. So when we place it on top of our background, we don't need to do any weird masking. So to do this, you need to select your object, go into Object Properties, and go down to Visibility, and you'll see Mask and Shadow Catcher. Once you click that, you'll notice something happens, but you'll see in the HDRI underneath. And the reason for that is because you haven't enabled transparency yet. So if we go into the render view and go to Film Transparent, we can see we've instantly got a shadow, which works pretty good. Now, on my model, I've got lights which are affecting the floor, and I don't think they'd overpower the sun like that. So I'm just going to turn them off to that object. So I'm going to grab these lights, make a light link, and then bring my plane in and select the invert so that it's not hitting my floor. And that's pretty good. Now, I do think it's looking a little bit dark, so I'm just going to raise that brightness up ever so slightly. And that's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with that. And the shot that I have in mind for this car is that it's going to be zooming through the street. So I'm going to have quite a bit of motion blur. Now, this means that the wheels are going to be spinning, and yes, you can do a spin blur in Photoshop, but that will mean that it will make the caliper and the brake disc spin, which is obviously not what we want. That makes it seem like it's not real. But something that we can do is actually animate these wheels in this software and have realistic motion blur. So to do that, I'm going to add in a single keyframe on the X rotation, so that it's rotating like that. And then we're going to go over to the frame 250, take the initial rotation number and just times that by 20, and then insert single keyframe. And this means that our wheel is going to rotate 20 times within that time frame. I think I'm also going to bring down that floor a little bit. And I'm going to do the same just by linking animation data. So now they're both spinning. One thing as well, which might help sell the realism, which is increasing the motion blur steps. So if you click the object which is going to be motion blurred, you can go over to motion blur here and then increase the steps to 7. This will mean that instead of just motion blurring from one to another point and blurring in between, it's going to do 7 increments of blur stages, which will make it look a bit more real. So I've done that for both of them, and that should help with the realism. And that's pretty much it. So my render settings are going to be quite straightforward. So this image is quite big, so you'll notice the camera's already put in the dimensions of the backplate. So it's going to be rendered at 11K, and I'm going to do a sample rate of 2000 without any denoise, and this is just to retain as much detail as possible, so it looks real enough to be in this photo. Obviously this won't look real if what you're putting in isn't real, well, isn't good enough, so just be wary of that. And from there I'm going to go into compositing, and I'm going to composite a single TIFF, so just a render layer image, and do a single TIFF layer. A lot of people like separating the shadow and the car, but for this simple purpose I'm not going to do that. So once I render this, I'll jump into Photoshop and show you how you can get from this to this. So now we've got our render. I've opened up the backplate that we're going to be using, and this is the car that rendered, and then I also rendered out one without a shadow, and you can see the difference that it makes with and without the shadow. But the reason for this one is just to get rid of some of these bits which are making it look a little bit weird. So I'm gonna just paste that out just by using a mask. Maybe that as well. Maybe just leave a little bit of that in, because I like how dark it is. See if there's any other bits that might be a little bit better with it. I think that's all fine. I think maybe just here, get a little bit more reflection. I think that looks good. So that's our base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a smart object of them two combined cars, and I'm going to focus on the background for a bit. So this shot, I'm not sure what the aspect ratio is, but it's quite a weird aspect ratio, and the car is taking up a lot of it. It doesn't look very dynamic. I'm thinking I want to change it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually change this to a 60:9 ratio. So I'm just going to raise this crop like so. And actually before I do that, I'm just going to remove the car out. And I'm going to generate expand and see what that does. So that's what the AI has done. It's made it look like we're in a sort of zombie movie. Everything's barricaded. But that's fine. We can tweak it. So let's just see what the other versions look like. That one's not too bad. That one's probably even better. That does look a bit weird. Right, yeah. So I'm going to go for this one, I think. And it doesn't matter if that's all messed up, because we're going to motion blur it now. So I'm going to smart object all of them again. And then I'm going to do a blur, gallery, path blur. And this is where we start having some fun. So if the way that I'm thinking about this is that the car's driving down the road, and then I'm doing a panning shot with the camera, which means it's going to be motion blurred a certain way. So it's probably going to be, if you think about this, if we're going that way, the motion blur is going to be forwards, if anything. So it's going to be this direction, and then it's not going to be completely in parallel with the road. So what I'm going to do is just slightly offset this, so it's kind of like I'm doing it at an angle. And I'm going to increase the speed. We can just change this based on how we want it later, but for now I'm going to do something like this. Do I want a taper? Probably not. Maybe a little bit of a taper. That looks pretty good. Maybe faster at the end, well, this end, and then I can do it slower at this end if I wanted to. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that, and I'm just going to turn on high quality at the top, and just for now that's how I'm going to do it. If I want it to look a little bit quicker, I can speed it up after, but I just wanted a good base that we can work from to start off with. Okay, so now we've got that base and we've got our car, and you can see now that our shadow is sort of clipping, so we're going to have to mask off a little bit of that just so it blends in a little bit more. So I'm just going to take a soft brush and just slightly mask it off so that it sits a little bit better, and that works. And then from here I'm just going to scale this up, maybe just ever so slightly. Maybe something like that would work. Yeah, that looks good. And you might be wondering what this is. This is essentially where this pot was transparent in the glass, and for some reason it always ends up looking like this. But something that we can do is actually enter our smart object mode, and we can do a layer under the car like so, and just take that color and draw in underneath it like so. Make it blend a little bit better, and I can do the same over here too. Maybe go a little bit darker. That should be good enough, and if I save that, that should update our main file, which it does. And this is going to get blurred as well, so that may look a little bit strong at the moment, but we can update it later. So overall, that's sitting quite good for me so far. Might be a little bit too small, maybe, but we can figure that out. So the next thing I'm going to do is apply a motion blur to this car as well. Now obviously we did our motion blur with the wheels, and I actually ended up slowing this down just so we got a little bit of that cool motion, but I'll show you what it would be if I didn't do it in 3D. So if I was to apply a spin blur in Photoshop, you can see how it started to blur that caliper, which is obviously not what we want. So this is way more realistic. Now, the only way that our car would be fully sharp in a shot like this would be if we had like a rig which was attached to the car and the camera was attached to the car, so that once the car was moving, the car was also moving with it. Now, that isn't how I plan the shot. I just said that I want the camera to sort of be panning, which would mean that part of the car would be motion blurred. So there's a really fun thing that you can do. You can go into filter, blur gallery, and then do another path blur. And I'm gonna be doing it the opposite way, so I'm going from the left to the right this time. And with this, I'm gonna enable, well, first I'm gonna get that sort of direction right again. And I'm gonna disable, well, slow down parts of this so that only certain parts are motion blurred. So on this right side, I'm gonna increase the speed quite a bit, and then on this left side, I'm actually gonna decrease the speed ever so slightly. Maybe I can bring that in this way, decrease it a little bit more. And here you can see if I turn it on and off, it's only blurring that right side. And that blur right there just immediately sells this shot a little bit better. It just fits way more into the shot. And this happens with a lot of like photographers. If you're doing a pan shot, you'll get something in focus, but you won't get everything. So this is something that will really embed the car into the shot. So let's just keep tweaking this. I would really like sort of this middle part to be in focus as much as possible. So I'm just going to play around with these settings. Maybe decrease this right side too. And preview that. Alright, let's just increase that right one again. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to turn on high quality and then press OK on that. So there we have our motion blurred car and our motion blurred background as well. You can see we've got a nice direction. I do think it's maybe slightly small. Again, this is something that it's just going to take some trial and error, so I'm just going to raise it up ever so slightly. That looks good, I think. So that's before, that's after. Yeah, I think that's sitting a lot better. So now we've got our blur right, we've got our background blur. We need to just make the shot sit better. So something that a lot of people like to do is to do a black and white layer. And then that just voids all color information and it only focuses on light and dark. Another thing people like doing is actually getting the info and then going over parts and looking at this RGB in the top right up here. So if I go into the dark area over here, it's saying it's about 26, 27, 28. And if I go to the dark part over here, we can see this part is actually pure black. So that means that the white point and the black points aren't sitting right, which essentially throws the shot off a little bit. I mean, already you can look at this shot and see that this car is a little bit more contrasty than the background, which means we need to bring the contrast of the background up to meet the car or vice versa. So to start off with, I'm just going to do a curves layer underneath the car, and I'm just going to pull that background in a little bit, and already you can see how much it's sitting right with the car. So that's before, and then if I bring it down, there you go. So that's before, after, and immediately it's looking better. Now again, with the highlights, this might be something that we need to change in the actual car file rather than the background file. But I'm just going to tweak it ever so slightly, and then I'll do a curve on the car as well. So maybe raise the background, raise the car shadows. So I'm going to clip it as well, so it's only affecting the car. So I'm just going to raise them shadows ever so slightly, and then maybe bump them highlights up. It's a fine balance. And then if I turn on off the black and white layer, we can see it's looking a bit more contrasty. But something that I really hate about Photoshop is that when you're doing brightness or curve adjustments, it changes the saturation as well. So you can see the actual shot's got more saturated. And the way around that is you could do a hue saturation and bring the saturation down, or you just change this to luminosity, and now it won't change the saturation as well, which I think Photoshop should do that by default, but it doesn't. Here we are. So that's looking a little bit better in terms of contrast. So again, that's before, that's the background, that's the car. The car has come up a little bit too far, and I think the background has come up a little bit too far as well. So I'm just going to bring both of them a little bit more into line. I think a lot of this is just eyeballing it as well, so don't be scared about trying to match numbers or whatever. Just do what looks right in your eyes, because it should work at the end of the day. So that's looking alright. Now, the red colour isn't actually sitting with me right, like very good, so I'm thinking about changing the hue of the car. Now, I could change this in 3D, but because this is a primary colour and it's only the car paint, I reckon we can change it quite easily. So I'm going to do a hue saturation layer, and while that's clipped to the car, I'm going to go to reds, and I'm just going to change the hue of this car, and immediately blue is just, it's sitting so much better for me. Now obviously it's affecting stuff that it shouldn't affect, so we're going to have to mask that off, but that should be quite easy. I think as well I'm going to decrease the saturation ever so slightly, and look at that before and after, and that's quite nice. Maybe just ever so slightly again. That's looking pretty good. So I'm going to apply a inverted mask, so now it's all black, and I'm just going to paint it on where I want it. So I'm going to get a brush and paint with white over the areas, and here you can see that it's actually creating some bleeding, and that's because we haven't given it enough information yet. So if I drag this slider, that's going to start using some of the pinks and the magentas and stuff like that. So it's about getting that fine balance of where you want it. So that's looking good. So let's just carry on painting. And you can also do a backslash, and this shows where your mask is. So this is quite helpful if you're doing a mask and you're not sure if you've painted over it yet. So let's just do all this area and then get all this red paint. Now obviously this reflector here is supposed to be red, so we need to just be wary of that. And obviously because we have motion blur now, it's a little bit tricky. Now we could do this in the smart object, but it's fine. We'll just do it manually. Should be easy enough. And then continue around here. Let's just watch out for this bright light, like so. And again, just double checking that mask. There you go. So there's a few bits over here that I missed. Doesn't matter if we go above the car because it's linked to the car there, so it won't affect the background. Right, we're nearly done. And then you can actually alt click the mask as well, just to see if there's any black points, if this helps as well, which there is over here, down here. And that's before and after, just by changing the hue. And it's not affecting anything else which shouldn't be affected. There's some red down here which we could just lightly paint over with a low opacity. So I'll go 20% and just paint over that slightly just so it's not red. Maybe a bit stronger and watch that paint work. That's looking pretty good. So that's before and after. Yeah, I definitely think the blue works a lot better. And you can see now that this windscreen too, it isn't sticking out as much as before. So that's pretty good. Now that I've done the car, I think the background could be a lot quicker. And I also think the whole shot needs some adjustments as well. So first I'm just going to change the speed of this background. Make it a little bit quicker. You know, get some actual speed in there. So that's looking a little bit nicer. So that was before, that's after, looking way more speedy now. And I think I'll delete that black and white layer and I'll start getting into how the image is actually going to look in the end. So I'm going to do levels and just start crunching the whites and then also the blacks as well. Just so it's got a little bit more punch. So it's looking way more punchy now. And I think I'm going to just do some smoke elements as well. So I'm going to create a new layer and I use 85mm brushes. I'll leave a link to his YouTube down below, but I always use Smoke 6 and I'm just going to get a white brush, very low opacity, just paint some smoke behind and then I'll start masking that off ever so slightly with a smaller brush like so, and then also just turn that layer down just as if like it's sort of burning out, something like that, which looks pretty good. Maybe put a little bit something there and then just feather that off once again. Oh, I was on the wrong layer then. So that's just brought it into the file just a little bit more. Maybe do that. That's looking quite good. And maybe I'll do another one with like a different color or something. Get like a black one with like a slight blue. And then bring that in. Change the opacity a little bit. One thing I am noticing is that these tires aren't really sitting right for me. So this is another thing with the color card. This probably wouldn't have happened because all the colors would have matched. But essentially, this surface here is quite desaturated, but the reflection of this is a little bit different. So I'm going to do a hue saturation while it's clipped to the car and desaturate it and then bring it maybe over to the pink side. And then I'm going to invert it and then paint that over the wheels just so this sits a little bit better, even with just the whole wheel basically, maybe just not that red part. And then I'll do the same over here as well. Now this may be a bit different because this part's over the blue, but we can have a look after. So that's without it, that's with it. So I think I went a little bit too far. That's looking quite good, just ever so slightly, like so. I think again this background could speed up. Yeah, so that's looking a little bit more speedy. It's sitting right with me. A lot of this is just trial and error. I mean, most of the time I just get up, walk around, and then come back to it and see if I like it or not. But that is looking good. One thing I am going to do, I think, is crop it ever so slightly, just so the car is the hero of the shot. So maybe something like that. Maybe just expand it a little bit. Just crop it ever so slightly. Alright, so that's the crop. So before, after, just making it the hero. Everything's looking good. Now, the one thing that I'm noticing is just everything looks really soft. There's no grain. There's like no chromatic aberration. There's no texture, and it's still looking a little bit flat. So I think everything's looking good so far. I think we just need to do a big camera raw filter on it just to get everything sort of within the same ballpark. So first, actually, before I do that, actually, I'm going to do a little sharpen. So I'm going to merge everything, do a high pass filter, and because this file's so big, it's going to be like 4 pixels. I'm just going to soft light and maybe do that like 3 times just to get a bit of more sharpness in everything. And that's looking good. Again, we don't want this to be perfect. We literally want it to be like a panning shot, as if like we've done it with a camera. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to merge everything, and then is that a bit weird? No, I think that's fine. So yeah, I'm going to merge everything, do a smart filter again, and then I'm going to go camera raw filter, and this is where everything is just going to come into its own element. So effects, always start off, do like, I don't know, 15 grain maybe. Like maybe we had to bump up the ISO so we could get a fast enough shutter speed. But you can see now the background and the CG. I know obviously we're getting a little bit of bleed in there, but that's fine. But the background and the CG is now one, like in terms of noise, which is very good. And then I'm gonna just bump up that texture a little bit, just to get some sharpness in there. And then maybe some clarity as well. Oh, wrong slider. Yeah, that's looking good. So now we're getting way more oomph in the photo. Maybe slight bit of dehaze. It's very powerful, so you just want to be minimal. Got to love a little vignette to bring your attention into the middle. So that's looking good. And one final thing. I love some sort of lens blur. I mean, lens distortion. So let's go optics, and then let's distort it inwards, like so. So that we're sort of getting some barrel distortion around the car. And that helps a lot. So now it's quite bulgy in the middle, but after that lens distortion, it actually sits a lot better. Could do a little bit of sharpening in here too. So maybe go too far and then bring it down. That's probably enough. Don't need a lot on that. And then maybe just tweak these values. Bring up the whites. Again, I'm just bringing them up, down, just seeing what works. Shadows. I'm going to keep them quite low so that it's quite contrasty. Highlights, maybe bring them down a touch. I'll bring them up. That's before and after. Yeah, so let's hit OK on that. And that's after. So without the camera raw filter, with the camera raw filter. A lot better, I think. And that's without the car and then with the car. It's pretty good. So we've got our blacks pretty much matched. So we've got pure black there, pure black here. We've got the greys matched. We've got some nice reflections. Obviously, this isn't this part, but it kind of fakes it as if like this sign is that. So that works. Nice motion blur on the background. So I think that's pretty much done. Now, in the thumbnail, obviously, I did a half-cut version, and I'll show you how to do that just so you can present it like on your Instagram if you want. But this is how you do a clay render to then put on top, if you're wondering. So I'm gonna grab a plane, scale it out of shot, and then I'm also gonna re-enable my plane that I disabled, and then shader editor, go to object, select this one, and then we can call it like clay override. And essentially this is just a white material, well, sort of grey, really rough. And then we go to our view layers, and then we search clay override. And what this will do, it will override every material apart from the light, so that you can get a really cool sort of render preview. So I'm going to bring down the quality as well, because it doesn't need to be as high. And I'm going to bring down the samples to about 500. Make sure it doesn't override my existing. So rename that clay, save, and then render that out. All right, so now that's rendered. We can close that and bring that into Photoshop. And from there, we just hold shift while bringing it in so it centers. And obviously the scale is going to be a bit different because we've cropped stuff since then, but just try and match it as best I can. So just using the arrow keys, and I've actually nailed it first try. And then I like to crunch it a little bit as well. Clip it, bring that up and change that to luminosity so it doesn't mess with the colors. And then I'm gonna group it and then mask it off like so. And there you go. Well, maybe you want the background. There you go. And now you've got a 3D sort of preview of what it looked like before. So that's pretty much it. That's how you composite a 3D car on a background. I hope you learned something. Maybe I can shoot one myself and then show you how you can do that, but I haven't got a 360 camera yet. But hopefully I can get one and then show you guys how to do that. So thanks for watching. Leave a like, comment. I'll always respond. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.